Thank you for tuning in to the World Builder's Anvil, episode 200.
200!
200!
200!
200.
Which is like 1,800 now?
Yeah, I think it's like 1,800 in cat years.
Yeah.
In cat episodes. For all the episodes that cats make, all the podcasts that cats make, this is like 1,800 of those. Today's episode is creating a final resting place for them old bones. Let's find a crypt keeper and make a necropolis.
So like sort of creating a home for a bone?
Don't make it dirty, Jeff. It was so clean until you got to talking about bones. Leave your bone out of it, Jeff.
I'm classy. Don't know where to start building your fantasy world?
Do you need more? Does it make sense?
Forget any worries and become a crafter of imagination.
This is the place where we will prime your mind.
Now, it's time to heat up the forge.
Break out the mithril ingots and hammer.
Welcome to the World Builder's Anvil. I'm Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And I'm Michael Miller.
Let's sup from the mug of Java and build. Welcome back. As always, I'm the classy Jeffrey W. Ingram.
And world-travelingly yours, and truly welcomed back. Mm-hmm. I am Michael Miller. I have just returned from Germany. So there are upcoming episodes that I have been absolutely inspired to come up with based on my journey to the great abroad. And I feel bad because we do have a listener, at least one, in Berlin. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to reach out to him. I don't have his name handy right now. I wanted to reach out to him and maybe like hang out. But we actually ended up leaving Berlin early. My wife and I were both taking ill at the end of our trip. So we only spent one day in Berlin, but I was going to try to shoot him a message and see if he wanted to, grab a pint at a local pub.
Wrong terms. Maybe beer bitter.
What have you? Look, I don't drink beer, so I wouldn't even had a beer. And not to...
Fumfig beer bitter.
Actually, I was going to say something that might get me into trouble, so I'm going to hold off on it. Well, I found out a couple of neat things. I could go on and on about Germany. I'll just talk a little bit now, and we'll get into it on another episode. But one of my friends asked me to get him a stein while I was over there. And I said, sure, and immediately regretted it, because I was like, no, that means I have to carry the thing. That means I have to put it in my luggage, and space in our luggage was at a premium. I immediately regretted saying yes. But this is what I have discovered. If you're in the United States and you say, hey, can I use your beer stein? Or I'd like to drink out of a beer stein. And we know, Americans know what you're talking about. Germans don't, because stein is the word for stone. So a stein, what an American would call a stein, is actually called krug. And I know I'm pronouncing that probably really bad. But it's like Krug. And that means a covered mug, like a capped mug.
If it's a covered one, yep. Or there's non-covered ones, and yep.
But the point is that in America, we are using the wrong word. So tell all your friends, if you're an American, it is not a stein, it is a krug. And, of course, you can get them made out of glass or metal or wood, but traditionally they're made out of ceramic. Mm-hmm. And I was able to buy my friend a 100-year-old ceramic krug from an antique dealer in Wittenberg, which is where Luther nailed up the 95 Theses to kick off the Reformation 500 years ago, and that's why my wife and I were in Germany.
Now I have to say this.
Go ahead.
This is my Stein story, because I'm a heathen American. I'll say what I want. And,
well, I've been told that you're not great with words, so I'm not surprised you're using the wrong one.
Yes, Mike. But I remember coming home, and my wife and I...
It's Michael.
Oh, yeah. My wife and I had lived together and been married probably for a little bit this time, and I had a couple sort of generic ones from fests that I had been to in Germany when I was stationed there. And so, like, in America, you typically think of them as really ornate and like a lot of design on the outside, and a lot of them have caps. Mine has no cap. There's no real design on the outside. It's a big, heavy ceramic mug that will hold a pint of beer.
Yeah, a lot of them are pretty plain. Like the ornate ones that I found some of them were quite expensive.
And as I turn around, and Mike's been to this, was in this apartment. It was this very small apartment with a very tiny galley kitchen. So like I come in and I hear my wife in the kitchen. So I start going around the corner and she's like, "Oh, do you want some chocolate milk?" And I go walking around into the kitchen and my wife is stirring up a gigantic chocolate milk in my stein. In my pint beer mug, she's putting in chocolate milk. I'm just like, that's wrong.
That's not what that's used for. That's not what that's used for.
That's wrong. She didn't care. She's like, but it's really big.
Honey, we have other big glasses. You're not supposed... I imagine you lost that one.
Yes. Yes, my wife gets to use that whenever she wants to for chocolate milk.
I am sure.
Shocking. That's
sure.
right.
So I actually... it was funny because my buddy had given me about $60 for his Krug, and I was able to find one at the antique shop that he told me was 100 years old. I don't know if that's true, and I even asked the guy that I was staying with, I was like, could this guy be lying? Like, you're a local business owner, like, do you know this guy? He's like, yeah, I know him, he's a good guy. And I'm like, do you think he'd be lying to me? And he goes, well, it's possible. I'm like, well, I don't think he is, though, because he's only selling it for €25, which is about $30. So I could understand if he was lying to try to sell it for more, but he wasn't. And he had other options at the same price tag, so... You know, I'm inclined to believe him. So I bought it, and then I showed it to the guy I was staying with. He's like, that is the tackiest Krug I have ever seen. It's got a couple kissing on it, and in German it says, the first kiss, oh, what a treat. And my buddy loved it. My buddy thought it was fantastic. Yeah. But I still had $35 to spend. So when we got to the airport... Well, I found one that just says Germany on it. It's got a bunch of German cities on it, and it's totally tchotchke airport, you know.
Yeah, like you get like a Hartford T-shirt.
Exactly. But so I bought him that one also because I still had money to spend for it.
Awesome.
So he
got a twofer.
He got two. So.
Yeah, no, it's I typically prefer to use a stein that's been untainted with chocolate milk or just a glass for my beer. But that's me.
I'm not a beer drinker, so out of my stein, out of my Krug, I only drink the blood of mine enemies.
That's what helps. That's what helps season it.
Seasons
like,
yep.
Yeah, you got to season them. So,
but none of that. Today, we are talking about crypts, not just any crypt. We are building a crypt. For those of you that have been paying attention, we are on an adventure. Jeff has been talking me through a brand new, we'll call it micro campaign, through his world, the upcoming world which you'll be able to explore in his new novel. And in that world, apparently, unbeknownst to me until this episode, I'm going to have to run the character into a crypt. And we're going to design that crypt today.
Yes, and he'll find out, because once again, we're doing this as an element that will be used in the story that you just heard in episode 199.
Oh, that's right. I forgot we were recording in reverse order. So you guys have actually already heard part of the tale, and we may have gotten to the crypt. So the crypt that you heard about in the last episode is actually the one that we are designing now.
Yeah, and we're kind of go over some of the features of the crypt, and some of the inspirations, and take some world building lessons out of the story that we just did. So the first thing was, if you ever go to Barcelona, there are just like these like hills on the outskirts of town that are just covered in, their catacombs go up. They're not under city. So typically when people think of a crypt, they think of like underneath of a church that sort of branches out into like a cavernous thing, which is very common European style crypt.
In the case of Paris, it's underneath most of the city.
Yes, because it's so big and vast, and there's really old sections and newer sections. Which Paris has a great necropolis if you really want a dungeon style crypt. But I wanted something a little bit different. One, I like the idea of things being exposed. So when you're doing something bad,
Jeff, stop exposing. Like, don't.
Bad and exposing have to go together.
This sounds like a recurring theme in your life. I thought you got over this in your 20s, Jeff.
You sound like a cop.
Look, just because your closed-minded view of the world doesn't include exposing all the things that are normally kept private.
But yeah, so the idea is with the crypt is I want it on the outside because, and maybe this is a soldier thing in me, but when you're scaling something, you're very vulnerable.
By scaling, you mean climbing,
by climbing,
not creating something to scale.
Yes, not creating something to scale, but to scale up over something is a very dangerous thing to do, and so. And I don't know if other people get that or if that's maybe just, like I said, from being a soldier and thinking about such things. I don't know. But going up, to me, is much more frightening than going under. So, and I think like the Barcelona, the city of the dead that sort of surrounds it is very kind of a cool place. So if you're ever in Barcelona, you can't miss it. It's all over. So now,
if you are ever in Barcelona, watch out for the pickpockets. Barcelona has one of the most lenient set of laws for pickpockets. If you're in, I think it's Romania, and you pick someone's pocket, you get put away for 3 years. If you pickpocket somebody in Barcelona, you get put away for 3 days. It's either 3 days or 14 days, and that's it. It's not something that goes on. It might go on your record, but it doesn't compile and make it bad. So the place is rampant with pickpockets because the laws aren't.
Europe in general is much more rampant with pickpockets. They have a much more skilled pickpocket group out there still than I know of in America, which is why most Europeans, at least when I was there, always kept their wallet in the front pocket. So one of the things, though, is, I think it's a good example of, though, is taking some kind of inspiration, but sort of twisting it into my own thing. So the Bedraken people, the people who have settled this area, don't natively bury people. So I kind of adopted its presence to the Cwerin who occupied this land before them, who were kicked out hundreds and hundreds of years ago. This is really old crypt.
So yes. What do the Bedraken people generally do with their dead? Do they burn them?
They're eaters. No, I'm joking. Yes, they burn them.
They burn them?
Yes. Crackle, crackle, crackle.
Crackle, crackle, crackle. I actually, I just got turned on to a YouTube series. I think it's called Criminally Listed. Mm-hmm. Really, really interesting videos, mostly about unsolved murders. Mm-hmm. And he's all over the board. Like, some of his videos are on murders that are very recent, some that have video evidence. Like, here's a video of either the victim or the murderer just prior to it occurring. Okay. But they don't know who the given people are, so they can't use it to identify the person, or like, it's almost like an unsolved mystery sort of thing. Okay. And then he's got ones that go back quite a ways, and there was
like old cold case stuff, or the old
super old, in some cases like more than 100 years old. And there was these two brothers in where were they? They were not too far from India, if I remember correctly. It wasn't India, but it was one of the neighboring countries, if I'm not mistaken. And they dug up multiple bodies and ate them in a curry. Multiple bodies. Like, they got arrested for it once. They were put away in prison. They got out, and then like not too long, like a year or two after they got out, they were caught for it again. Like, there was this horrible smell, and then the police came and they found a body of like a young child that they had dug up that had died like within the past year, and they had eaten a good portion of him. Like, not only are they eating people, they're eating long dead people.
Well, now, I would argue I would rather them do that than to, like, Jeffrey Dahmer or someone.
I don't know, man. Like, I mean, no part of it is good, but I would have to think that fresher would taste better.
Probably, but at least they're not killing people to eat them. They're just digging up old dead people.
I guess, but anytime you're desecrating the dead, it's just never a good scene. For fascinating reading, if you're not familiar with Ed Gein, look up Ed Gein. Ed Gein is the inspiration for some of your favorite stories, such as Psycho and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Were both inspired by the story of Ed Gein. Who is, if I'm not mistaken, is he from?
I have no idea. I have no idea.
You don't know who? You know nothing of Ed Gein?
No.
Oh my gosh!
I don't care about this kind of crap.
I want to say he's from your home state.
He might be.
If he isn't, he's right in that neighborhood.
You're from the northeast of the United States. You have no idea of how the states lay out outside of the northeast or west coast.
What I'm
you could
saying,
probably get the coast. You could probably get both coast and struggle deeply within the vast mileage of the country.
Yes, that's true. I will concede a lot of that. I would say I would do okay. My United States geography isn't terrible, but what I'm saying is that I don't remember exactly which state he's from. Mm-hmm. Like it might be Indiana. I'm just not 100% sure.
You know, as my friend used to say, you know, Indiana, Iowa, Illinois, one of those I states.
Now you're going to make me look it up. You keep going with the Crypt thing. I'm going to look up Ed Gein just to give you a reference.
Okay, so the next thing is I also like sort of the stone structures of them. So sort of the base of the necropolis is going to be where the modern nobles of the town, the Prince of Bedragus and his family, have a crypt there because when you're the royals are starting to bury themselves. Probably over the last 100 years or so. It hasn't really spread out into the general population yet. But the people who consider themselves of note and have substance like to bury themselves. It's something that sort of shows up time and time again in cultures as they become wealthier. And typically they bury themselves with goods. So there's a stone necropolis, sort of stone buildings built at the base of this old Cwerin necropolis that has buried bones in there. Has buried families in there. There are good treasures and goods also in there. And since the people who bury them are still in power, they actually have guards whose job is to watch over the necropolis. And so it's actually guarded, which will add a level of difficulty as hopefully Michael's not dead at this point. We don't know because he hasn't done it yet.
Now, I take it back, it was Plainfield, Wisconsin, so only about 2 states away. Mm-hmm. I do have a question. Is the necropolis, is there a religious significance? Because usually when we get into rites of the dead, we're usually talking about some sort of religious rite, whether it be, obviously Christian burials are very religious. Obviously, mm-hmm. the Egyptians had their whole culture revolved around mm-hmm. death.
Yeah.
So what is your Cwerin necropolis centered around?
So it's centered around mainly one thing, and it is how the equinox happens in fall. So when you're having a fall equinox, especially the royal crypts that are built higher up, which is where Michael went to, actually the sun will shine in all of the way to the back of the crypt.
Oh, no
so
kidding.
It's sort of like a 3-chamber crypt, and it's designed on that day that the light can still reach in and touch the body. And that is their connection to the equinoxes.
That's actually a really cool idea. That reminds me of like Indiana Jones and like The Fifth Element. Mm-hmm. That's cool. I like that.
Yeah. But that was typically something that was very popular with older cultures anyway. I know there's like a temple in Egypt that does that. So with the Cwerin, there's a heavy connection with like this with the equinoxes, and that's when their spirits have a chance to escape and get out. So all of the cliff facing towards the equinox when the sun's at a certain point, those are the important crypts. So somewhere near the middle of the mountain itself is kind of the most important part, and that's where the old crypts are. And it's not really a mountain; it's a probably a 500-foot hill, but it's pretty much a sheer cliff. There were originally walkways along different levels, but the Bedrakim didn't upkeep them, and they're hundreds of years old, so they're very spotty at best. So to be able to move up and down at this point, you would have to actually climb. You could use some paths, but it'd be a series of using paths and climbing to get up the thing. Now, the original crypt that we're heading towards the original king of Bedrakis, King Hiram, and or Herman, I believe, actually, and he actually took the most important king's crypt, had all of the stuff dumped out of it, and had himself put in there, and it was more of a statement of, "Oh, this is mine now." And so, because they're part of a hill, they never really got rid of them. They don't have a particular religious connotation to the Bedraken people. To Cyrans, it has a religious connotation, and when cults get obsessed with death, death and crypts go hand in hand. So,
you said something a minute ago there about during the equinox they have a chance to escape. What exactly do you mean by
the
that?
souls.
Like the souls.
So
the souls
so
they remain in the body until the equinox?
Well, that's what a Syrian person would tell you.
Okay.
Yes. So that is their religious belief. Jeffrey doesn't buy it, but the Syrian do it. It's their versioning. So that's where the souls would have a chance to get out and go, and they need the sunlight to do that. Now, so the crypt itself is sort of near the middle of the actual cliff face, the one that they're heading towards. They could, in theory, they're going for the bones of a king. Since the kingdom of Garbadus came around, they don't have kings. So all of the royal tombs at the bottom aren't of kings. And specifically, Bruno asked for the bone of a king. And so there's only one place that people know that there's a bone of a king. There might be other ones. There's some other royal style things, but no one really knows who's in them because it's not important to the Bedraken people. But everyone knows the resting place of King Herman because, like I said, he was making a political statement by putting his bones in there.
So basically, we have to go for the Grand Poobah, or not, to be sure. Like
to be sure that the spirit is powerful enough to do battle with the spirit protecting the thing. Essentially, the idea is Bruno wants to control it by authority. So you get a spirit that has more authority than that spirit, and it can win.
Gotcha.
So it's the most authority that you know of. And
I imagine that means it's going to be at the top.
It's actually in the middle.
Okay.
The top would actually be easier because it's not a super high area. You could probably get to the top and come down. It's in the maximum place for your disruption. The good news is the guards are really concerned mainly about the royal tombs.
Well, if this guy was a king, doesn't he qualify?
No, because he was of the older kingdom of Bedrakis, which fell. The Garbaldus does not have any. It's kind of like a pharaoh of a different dynasty watching the tomb of a different pharaoh. If they catch you doing something wrong to a pharaoh that's like 800 years old, they'll get annoyed and you'll probably get killed. But they're not actively watching that. The tombs at the bottom that have the guards, and the reason why there are active guards around, are to watch the current ruling family's ancestors.
Yeah, because they might. Okay, so because I assume one. Well, look, that's my uncle or my grandfather or whatever. So
exactly.
And two, because they're not super old, there's almost definitely still some stuff that hasn't been stolen.
Exactly.
And
And it belongs to the current prince, not the guy who's dead. Where there is some idea of taking it with you, most people don't really believe that. It's not a huge Bedraken thing that you physically take stuff with you to the afterlife. But being of high noble birth, typically it's more of a way to show off your wealth that your family can afford to bury you with old weapons and jewels because they're powerful.
Yeah, we're so well off. We don't need that.
We don't need this stuff that could feed a family for a year.
Yeah, that's totally awesome. But you know what? We're so wealthy. We're just gonna bury it. We're just gonna leave.
We're just gonna bury it. Whatever.
Stuff. Forget it.
And of course, if that if five princes down the road go and they might go visit the crypt themselves, most of that stuff's probably been stolen by actual other people of the family.
I was just gonna ask that. Are there cases where the family loots their own tombs?
I would say that there probably has been. It's a relatively new process. It's like I said, they've only been doing it for about 100 years themselves, at least here. But once again, it's another way to reaffirm that this is forever Bedracum territory. And seeing that they call the city Bedracus, they really, this is like the heart of the culture, especially if you ask the locals. It's kind of like New York City being the city. You ask people from New York City is the city, but people in San Francisco or Chicago might challenge that.
Well, it's funny. We actually had this discussion not too long ago. We were in a store in the mall, and we happened to overhear a conversation where the employees were having a bet, and they asked us along with some other people in the store. And this store is in Farmington, which, if you're not familiar with Connecticut or the greater New England area, this is a town in Connecticut that is pretty much in between New York and Boston. And one of the guys was saying, well, if you say the city, what city are you referring to? And they were asking all the people that came in, because this guy was a proponent of, if you say the city, you're referring to Boston. And everyone else is like, no. I'm like, if you say the city, you're referring to New York. Like, you're not. I'm like, if you're outside like the greater Boston area, sure. If you would say the city, of course you're going to be referring to Boston, but not this far south. And
no.
And so that guy lost the bet, and they were trying to come up with what would be a good like, you've lost the bet. This is what you have to pay or do, and my suggestion was the one they actually went with. So,
all right. Yeah, no, I agree, and there's truths to that, and then people, even if they don't live by a thing they consider the city, are probably kind of annoyed by that. This is obviously, but this was like really sort of where the Bedracum first sort of considered theirs. Before that, they were nomadic, so this is kind of the area they actually settled first, and so they went to a lot more efforts here to make it like this is ours now.
And refresh me, the Bedracum are mostly human, are they not?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
There are some orcs who are technically follow more of a Bedracum culture at this point, because after the Bedracum, the orcs came in after the Bedracum,
right?
And then the Bedracum culture sort of retook the area, and so there are some orcs that, peasants kind of stay where peasants are. So. So where orc peasants have settled, that they now have human lords. So it is sort of changed hands a little bit. But they're typically considered second-class citizens, but it's a small portion of the population.
The orcs are considered second-class citizens?
Yeah, obviously.
Okay.
And
Obviously.
Now, so once you make it to the middle of the cliff area, you have the tomb itself. And it's a 3-chamber tomb. It's not huge. Don't think of like massive Egyptian tomb, but it's fairly large. So there's this sort of outside chamber, which is more similar to what all of the tombs are on the cliff face, except instead of having an area in the back where bones would be stacked into, there's actually a hallway going deeper into a slightly larger chamber. The outside chamber actually has what I like to call block script, which is Cwerin adapted the alphabet from a group of elves that were in the area, and so their alphabet is all based on squares, and depending on the placement of the things inside of the square to find what letter it is, wherein it's a very simplified version of the Elven language, and the Bedracum language is actually an alphabetic script. So it is an alphanumeric. It is technically part of the Indo-European family of languages, as that's really sort of deep lore of my world. But there is a connection between humans on Earth and humans elsewhere, and actually it was all kind of connected earlier in time. And so the Indo-Europeans actually existed in both areas. And so there's a base connection at that level to the Bedracums and to many peoples on in both planets. And they have an alphabetic script based off of ruins that they've traditionally used for thousands of years at this point. And but they sort of started to modify them and adopt the Shiftarian language characters into their own, and that's kind of how they started developing a written language.
Now, when we get into talking about literally tomb raiding, my mind goes to things like liches. Is it possible for any of these cultures to create or have such a thing?
There are liches in my world. They're very rare. Most people would have never even heard of them. There are a couple that exist.
I use lich as an example. I basically mean any sort of supernatural undead thing that might be common in a tomb area.
Oh, every culture has their idea of what happens when the dead come back to life, and it's never good.
There's never a positive to that. It's never, oh look, Uncle Bobby.
Mm-hmm. Yes, the idea of vampires are sort of common in the cultural lexicon. So yes, most definitely. And there's quite possibly, if you hang out near where and the dragon burn their dead, so it's not so common around here. But there have been times where like everything seems to be going wrong. They grab some old dead person, they stake them, and they let out a screech as if they're dying. And so that there are stories of that happening with some of the nobles who've been buried, but it's not super common at this point. But burials are becoming more common in peasants who live in cities where there's a little bit more money to be made if you don't die of disease. The first chamber has a bunch of this script which no one really knows how to read. There are probably some people in the city, but it's relatively, you're hoping, unimportant to the crypt. Then there's another chamber where they're sort of like, the Cwerin are very much inspired by Celts. And so there's this idea where you have Celtic knot workings, but they're very obsessed with a square shape. So it's sort of squares within squares within squares. And it's just like this whole design thing. In the second room, it's a little bit larger. Then there's a hallway to an actual throne room. There's a throne built in the back. So if you're there during the morning of the equinox, there will be full light shining on the throne, which is where the bones of King Herman are kept. Yay! Now, the good thing is King Herman did not want his bones taken.
So there'll definitely be bones to be found.
So there is a cage built. So, and definitely think of Indiana Jones with this. If you remove stuff from the throne, a cage drops down.
Oh, interesting.
To entrap the people within there, which is probably how Michael died in the last episode.
Or at least how Jeff plans on killing me. Did I mention the cage was covered in spikes? Poisonous spikes. There's poisonous. They're poison spikes.
They're not poison spikes, but there are spikes.
They're built out of piranha.
They're not meant to so much kill you as into grievously sort of club you as they come down, maybe cut into you a little bit to cause you to become septic and die over time. There are some bones scattered. It's been looted to the nines, except for the throne. But there are bones of people who've been caught in here and who've died. The thing will get raised back up. And sometimes when the next one falls down, it will crush old bones, or maybe it caught the leg of someone, as it's a very heavy cage designed to do maximum force coming down very quickly.
So they go in there and do a little maintenance every now and then. They have
on this specific tomb, because this tomb is historically important.
They need to reset that trap every now and then.
Yep. But unfortunately, it's doubtful, and you guys would know this. There's probably no actual loot in this thing because it's not actively guarded. So over time, people have died, but people have come in there and they found it with the cage down, and thieves are very, very persistent. So
yes, they are. Yes, they are.
So that's the problem with burying yourself with treasured goods, is where people know where you're at. Sooner or later, someone gets it. And so, but that's kind of the thing with this, and that's the trap in this room. That is, which you guys will have knowledge of.
Oh, excellent.
You guys will know about that going in. because there's rumors about people getting caught and dying in there.
Oh yeah, I imagine based on what you're describing, it's entirely possible that some people have gotten hit by that trap, but made it back to the village.
Made it back out. Like they were on the outside and it came down. Their buddy was trapped.
Right.
So like they were the guy who fished out the necklace off of the king while their buddy's screaming for help, and they're like, "Oh, we'll come back and get you."
We'll get
and
you.
they go to the bar and like, "Oh my God, Bobby just got killed." Well, he's not dead yet, but he'll be dead in a couple days.
Yeah, I mean, we could go get him, but he's not going to. I mean, did you see his leg? I mean, it was like bent over. I mean, I like Bobby, but, if Bobby doesn't make it, that's only 2 cuts on the necklace instead of 3.
Right.
So, way I see it.
So you guys definitely know about the general layout of the tomb. Going into it, you guys will know of the trap, which is useful. Which is why it's not so bad for us talking about it now before you hear about it. Because obviously, whenever you do a heist story, it's important to have things go a little sideways, at least at every turn, to show off the cleverness of the characters. And there will be a sideways, which is not mentioned here. Unless, of course, they get caught by the guards at the cliff, which will be pretty embarrassing, and they'll just die horribly.
Part of me hopes we do.
The end.
So terrible to my characters. And you are.
I know.
And you are too. All right, well, let me take a look at some more of the notes that we have on here. So
now we're essentially going through the chambers part at this point.
Are you up to the 3 chambers, or?
That's what we're just kind of going through. So really, we just kind of finished up the chambers there. I don't know if you have any more questions about them itself.
Well, I think that maybe we have a brief discussion about if you're creating a tomb. I think the first thing I would recommend to anybody, whether it be for a game or a book, would be to do a little tomb research. Look up. I mean, look, you could do the video gamey Lara Crofty thing and just make up something. That's fine. I will not begrudge anybody just making something up. But I find that if you just do a little research, you find stuff that people have done that is real, that does work, and that gives you at least a base, at least somewhere to go with your concept.
And really think about it, at core, there were 2 major elements from real life that inspired parts of it. Sort of the visual cliff necropolis, which I find very cool, from Barcelona.
Yeah.
And then the idea of chambers and what get lit on the equinox, which is actually a Celtic thing, and I've seen done in different ways in places like in Egypt as well too. They had to move that temple because they flooded the Nile, so they had to actually take the entire temple and move it up the cliff, so it didn't get lost under the Nile when they put in the giant dam. So. So I don't think it works anymore correctly.
Was this something done more modern, or was this something done in ancient times? They moved an entire.
No, it was like within the last couple. They built the Asher Dam to create hydroelectric energy for the country.
Okay,
of
so
Egypt.
very modern.
I think it was in the 60s.
Okay,
and they literally took the entire tomb, or this was a temple built by Ramses II, and they moved it up the cliff face.
That's so crazy.
Because they knew that once they you create lakes when you have dams.
Yeah.
So they had to lift it above the water.
That's crazy. Like a crazy idea that just came to mind that might be impractical, but this would be something that you could like have an idea, then do research and discover how silly it is. Like an idea of a hanging tomb where the bodies are suspended. But you also think about what that would do. Like it would create stench. The bodies would eventually fall apart unless they were propped on something, or
how do you keep them suspended?
Yeah, exactly. Like that.
I have seen
that might.
I have seen tombs, and I know lots about tombs because I watch way too much documentary stuff, and I like stuff that typically sooner or later they talk about how they bury people, and I think Incans did something very similar to this, and it's probably been done in a couple of the places, but like the king or ruler would be in the middle. There'd be like a dais in the middle, and there'd be like these 4. I don't know what you call them, sort of like raised areas of stone within the tomb, and there would be actual like bodies buried there as well too, and they think they might have been maybe guards or possibly servants for the ruler who was buried, but like they were on these things raised up even higher than the person being buried. So that's an interesting thing too. Is sometimes a tomb for one could be a tomb for many. There are lots of instances of that where entire households, you'd have like ancient Chinese emperors, and I know other places did this as well too. When they died, like all of their concubines would get chucked with them into the tomb.
Yeah, that's no fun.
Yeah,
There's
where at least in Egypt they would make like little figurines to represent people.
right.
So you could have
this is to show that your emperor loved you, but we're not going to chuck you into the grave with him.
But who knows, if they find an older one, maybe at some point before that they were a little less efficient and they just chucked the people in there too.
This reminds me, going back to Germany, it's not a tomb quite thing, but it is like a hanging death thing. There is a church in Munster that I believe it was a Catholic cathedral, and as a means to discourage Protestants, if I'm not mistaken, they took a number of Protestant. I don't know if they were pastors or priests, or they were clergy of some kind, and they had these iron cages that are still hung up on the church today.
Oh wow!
They are about 65 feet above the ground, so you can see them from all over. And they put these men in these cages, hanging up on the church, alive, and they stayed in those cages until they died days later. Or I don't know how long it took. I assume that it.
I think it's good that they leave it though, because it's one of those things where it's like it's best not to forget history, so we don't do that stupid crap again.
Well, you know what? Yeah. It's kind of interesting how the Germans, because I ran into this in a couple of different places. I feel like we kind of took a tour of Germany's churches, because everywhere we went, pretty much every city we got to go into some of their churches. Like people would always ask us. Like we most of the time we were in these different cities with my wife's family, and they would be like, "Oh, you want to see the cathedral?" I'm like, "Sure." So we got to see so many, and we went to, let's see, Dusseldorf, Munster, Leipzig, Dortmund, Wartburg Castle, Berlin. I'm sure there's a city or two I'm forgetting, but we got to see churches in almost every place, and they're very big on maintaining their history. In Wittenberg specifically, on the town church, which is not, so there's the castle church, which is All Saints Church, which is where Luther nailed up the Reformation, the theses to kick off the Reformations. The city church is about 3 blocks away, and on the city church there are like sculptures and carvings and reliefs, actually is the word I'm looking for, on the church itself. And there's one spot where there is an extremely offensive relief that is anti-Semitic, and many years ago they were like, we should take this down. It's very offensive to the Jewish culture and the Jewish people. This should be removed. And they were like, no, because it is part of our history, and although it is shameful and awful, we don't want it to be forgotten. And plus, Wittenberg being a religious center of the country, if they take it off that church, they know the rest of the country will follow suit. So
that's kind of interesting. And another just little sideways here before we get to the world building task. Just the opposite happened when I was in Florence. The Medici had a connection with local Jewish people who also were typically more into banking in Europe. And actually, one of the big criticisms against the Medici were, that they committed usury, that they would charge interest for the loans that they gave out. And at one point, I believe it was one of the popes was having an issue with the Medici, and they're like, you have to expel all of the Jews from your town. And where they had a bit of a relationship, sort of, and they had political power and clout at the time, instead of doing that, there's a cathedral, and it's not the Duomo, it's not the famous one, it's another one, and I don't remember the name of it. It has a giant Star of David embedded into it, and it was sort of like a slap in the face of the Pope at the time. So very interesting how these things show up in the churches, which were central to all of these towns in Western Europe. So just a fascinating topic. So, but getting back and wrapping this one up here, we hit the world building task of the day, which will be a shocker. Michael, go!
Create a cool crypt or a necropolis for your world.
And by cool,
and I love
we don't mean actually cool, but actually cool to the touch. It should be a cooler temperature.
Well, odds are it's going to be. Unless, like, look, yours gets sunlight, so yours might not be all.
Yes,
cool.
Mine is not that cool, and they're not deep, so you're not getting a lot of insulation from the cliff itself either. But typically,
let's
you think of them
be
underground.
fair. You don't have to go very far into stonework before it gets cold. You don't have to go far at all.
But these are all open air, though.
Doesn't make a huge difference. If you don't have airflow, which
no airflow.
Yeah, if you don't have airflow, then generally it doesn't matter. If it doesn't have light and it's into stone, then you're immediately going to be working with the temperature of the earth.
But these are designed to get light just at a certain time and place. It's really important in one spot. It's on the sunny side.
And I just love the word necropolis.
The word necropolis is awesome.
Such a great
awesome. Yes.
And I also feel like the word necropolis kind of refers to like a city of dead, not necessarily a tomb.
That's exactly. So it's like the cliff area is a necropolis, and there's a crypt within there that you're specifically targeting. So you could even call like the Paris has the really famous cemetery on the surface where like Chopin and like Jim Morrison were buried at. That's a necropolis. So there's lots of necropolises all over the world too. So two things easily to find a lot of information on to get inspired to develop your own. And now for the real world task of the day, we created a spin-off Undercroft group to act as your NaNoWriMo support group.
I might not be aware of this. Like, did you create a...
I did this literally when you were in Germany.
What is it?
And you're actually part of the group.
Is it a Facebook group, or are you talking about the thread?
It is also a Facebook group.
So it's a new Facebook group altogether. Okay.
It's linked. If you're a member of the Undercroft, it will be linked right there too. You'll see a button near the top for our linked groups. And this one is called the Undercroft NaNoWriMo support group. But if you search Undercroft, they both will come up. And I think if you go to gardul.com/nano, NaNo, it will take you to the group. But go ahead and join that group if you're taking part in NaNoWriMo. You should be have started already, but it's still not too late. We're about, this is the second week of the month, I believe.
Oh, that's right. By the time they get this, NaNoWriMo will have already started. I forgot.
But, maybe you're getting stressed out. Maybe you need some more support. Go there, get some cheerleading, get some people trying to help encourage you, just good times.
And also just some accountability. Like, I find that even just a little accountability is sometimes all it takes to rally your efforts in the right direction.
Mm-hmm. But there will also be a link if you go to the show notes. If you go to gardul.com and go to the show notes for episode 200, there'll also be a link back to the group I've created as well too. So that is all, and we hope you all have a great week and go ahead and create that necropolis. Thank you so much for listening to the World Builders Anvil.
We would love it if you would share the World Builders Anvil with 2 of your friends.
And so would they.
If they are unfamiliar with podcasts, then you get to introduce them to the wonderful world of podcasting.
Take them to Stitcher or iTunes, or best of all, just send them to our website, www.gardul.com.
That's GARDUL.com.
Now strike while the mithril's hot.